How do we resolve it? I think that we have to do some things like what I shared in this recent district, of finally saying, let's take a look at the district demographics and let's really honestly look at disparity. Let's see if we can we find any research to support the fact that a child with language and learning disabilities ipso facto should not end up in an immersion program? And the state of the field right now is no. So, given those things, what else do we need to do? And maybe sometimes starting out by coming up with lottery and quotas and things is a step potentially in the right direction. Because I don't think that we can ignore them. I don't think we can keep having teachers say, gee, it's not working out, they're struggling in grade 1. They probably need to go to the English medium program.
One more question. Can you squeeze 2 more because there's 2 there and I have a hard time. 2 fast questions.
Well, I really want to thank James for taking the time to really look at the needs of the students, because Magaly alluded to the fact that sometimes older, more experienced bilingual teachers said they didn't want their kids to be sort of left behind as these English speakers learn the language. And in some programs we see that the achievement level is lower. And if we take the time to disaggregate the data and to really do some interventions for the programs, you won't have those long-term English learners because you will address their needs. And I see many programs that don't take that step. So it was just a really important point that you made.
Yeah, and I have a question. About Tara's, like the one that you went to the Spanish and gave the example of. Two sub-questions. Number 1, what do you think is going on? Why is that going on? And number 2, is there a difference between the dual language and the immersion programs in that outcome?
That's an interesting question. Thank you. Why do I think it's going on? Any number of things. The research has shown that it's in part is attributed to the input, the nature of language that the students in the immersion context are actually exposed to by teachers. We know, for example, how can we expect students to become proficient with things like subjunctive and conditional when it almost never surfaces in the teacher's language? That's one thing. A second thing, which I think is actually more to the point, is we have a great deal of difficulty in immersion classrooms balancing teacher talk with student language production opportunities. If there's one thing that that is a mantra in my work, what are you doing? Do you know how to engineer student talk? And not just the 1 or 2 word student talk. I was just recently in a classroom and it's awesome to say talk and turn, talk and turn. The talk and turn typically distilled down to maximum 1 sentence. That's not enough. We need sustained and extended language production opportunities being regularly engineered, and kids are not going to be able to produce language until we get better at figuring out how to do that. The other point that you made, which is, will our two-way context, when we're bringing together proficient language users in 2 different languages, are we going to see that as the magic bullet? Because that's honestly what everybody was really hoping for. The reality is we've got about 15 years of data on that now, and the news is not great. What we have seen is that we still see the same issues. Preference for using English, whether the students are Mandarin speakers in a 2-way context or English speakers, preference for using English. Interactions between peers still predominantly in English. In fact, some of the research has really shown that native speakers of the minority language, a Spanish proficient child, will select other native speakers in the classroom to use Spanish with. But when it comes to an English L1 peer, they will switch readily and almost automatically to using English. So one of the things that we learned over decades of research, and I just like to say, or maybe I'll just end with this, contact does not mean collaboration, and contact does not mean we're going to be growing stronger proficiency. And the research that we're seeing is very much supporting that reality. We need to get better at engineering contact so that it's getting us what we're wanting, which is cross-cultural understanding and more native-like proficiency development.
Let me just jump in. The cross-cultural, and that's why I raised this issue of, is it an American pragmatic overlay? Now we have an immersion graduate who is a fluent Spanish speaker and has a clinic and has Mexican patients. Who's pragmatics in Spanish? That gets really fascinating. Do you talk about body parts, where in the Spanish-speaking world you might not want to be doing that? Who do you take half the prescription because it's cheaper? Do you, is it mañana? What about being on time to a doctor's appointment? Who's pragmatics? But the issue I wanted to jump on here was in the 1980s, I had 5 undergraduates at the University of Minnesota following around 32 Spanish immersion kids in St. Paul for 5 months. My interest was, what language do they do their math and science problems in? And guess what we found? We found that out of earshot of the teacher, as soon as the math problem got cognitively challenging, like not just one has 5 rapices and Carlos has 6, how many do they have together? But much more complex, like she's so many feet tall and he's so many, how much taller is the third person? When it got cognitively complex, they'd say, whoa, and they'd switch into English. So this gets really interesting into the use of the multilingual brain. So that was in the 80s. In the 90s, we did an intervention. We gave kids little popsicle sticks with a picture of himself. We gave them a mirror, and we gave them a cardboard cell phone. Back in the 90s, the kids didn't have their own phones. And we said, talk to yourself, develop your inner voice. It's got to be in academic language in Spanish. We also had them write postcards to themselves about how a fulcrum works, things like that, in Spanish, which they sent to their homes. So they got in the mail, they'd get this postcard in Spanish saying, el fulcro funciona de esta manera. And so it was really cute. What did we find in that particular intervention? That yes, we can improve the kids' academic abilities in Spanish, that they weren't doing it on their own, that it's not a given. I'm delighted. Now remember, this was Immersion Elementary. We now have middle school, we have high school. I think more is better than less. Another program, a research study we did back in the early 70s, middle 70s, was attrition. That's another issue we have to deal with. When you don't use a language, it goes away. Even your own. What we found is there was attrition in Spanish in recess between first and second grades. When the kids came back, guess what? We found that the last thing they learned was the first forgotten. So before the break, they knew the se ha estado distinction in Spanish. It went away for some kids over the summer. So there's a lot we can do research on, and these research issues are still alive. The attrition one, the one with pragmatics is most definitely, and this whole one of what language are kids actually languaging in. So I throw these all out as real issues. And the last one is this one of, can we do something about pidgin? In that very first grade class, went down to Mexico. And a little first grader keeps saying to the fire chief in this fire station in Mexico, he says, ¿Puedes subir en el camión? What he meant was, can I get up in your truck? But he kept saying, ¿Puedes subir? And the guy said, sí puedo. And so he didn't get up into the truck. He was invited, and he got so frustrated, he finally got puedo. So it's like, does it make a difference? And if you're in a pidgin environment where there's no consequence to getting wrong, why worry about getting right? Who cares about the subjunctive or conditional? I saw that in the I saw it in a French immersion school where the kid has to say, if all kids were here, how many kids would there be? So the little kid said, si tous les élèves sont là, it didn't matter that she didn't use the conditional because no one cared. You have to have higher stakes, and that's in the real world, when you're trying to get a job, and where it makes a difference. So I think these are challenges, and they can be met, but we have to think this through, get beyond the glamour of the programs to how do we make the reality work. Thank you.
Great, so we're going to work some more of these things out.